Thank you, Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer. Let me join everyone else in expressing Republic Day greetings to the entire nation and to those who are viewing us online. At our very first motion in this House that treated with the COVID-19 pandemic, I pointed out that we are essentially at war. And I made that comparison with fighting war because research will show that pandemics have killed more people across the globe than any war in Earth's history has done. In fact, whether we go from the Black Death plague to the fatal flu, or even if you want to include HIV/AIDS in the mix, when we look at the numbers of people around the globe that have died at different points in the world's history from pandemics, you will see that more people die from pandemics than from guns and wars. And therefore, we ought to always take treating with pandemics seriously. And I started here because, truth be told, Trinidad and Tobago is a country that has a penchant for making kicks out of serious matters. It's just who we are by nature. It's how we treat with trauma. It's how we treat with things that are wrong or that are hurting us. But I'm afraid that this is one matter that we cannot treat lightly. Because the reality is our economy post-COVID will be decimated. In fact, it's practically there. And God alone knows how we will get over this and how we will manage post-COVID. And even now that we are in this COVID experience, we have to look carefully at every single sector and look at how we ought to adjust. Today we are looking at the education sector. And for me, the major challenge with the motion as tabled is that the motion rightfully recognizes that there are responsibilities both for the people and other stakeholders, and there are responsibilities for the state. But sometimes out of laziness or sometimes out of sheer neglect, the state tends to want to foster upon the people its own responsibilities. And that's where I have a challenge. What really are the responsibilities of the state in all of this? And even as we stand here today and we ask members of the public, private citizens, corporate citizens, to contribute more, to give more, notwithstanding their own difficulties, we must ask ourselves critically if there is an opportunity cost for resources that the state has constantly mismanaged that we could have easily been putting towards our education sector now. Think about all the cost overruns. Think about all the projects that started, that billboards went up, that we started building, never got opened. Think about the millions that we waste away in different vanity projects. Think about those that we have lost through pilfering and never got back. And think about how many devices we could have purchased. Easily, if we are honest, and not just Tobago, Trinidad must be equally honest. If we are honest as a nation and we look at the opportunity cost of corruption, now is a good time to remind ourselves that corruption costs developing societies like ours way too much, and it can become a matter of life and death. And that's where we must start. And so when people are skeptical and cynical about our pleadings, about our beggings, for them to come up and contribute in this time, we have to understand it's not that they're being greedy, it's not that they're being selfish, but it's because they understand the opportunity cost of corruption. And it will be remiss of me to not bring that to bear on this discussion today. The motion acknowledges the involvement of parents and guardians and the challenge that they face during this time. And yes, I will join with everybody else in saying, parents, thank you for being in this fight. And I will join with everyone else in recognizing that parents are challenged like no other time before. And we have to remember that for the generations we have alive now, for most of us, we have never ever experienced a pandemic quite like this. Yes, HIV/AIDS is a global pandemic, but with HIV/AIDS, you generally have to go looking for it to get it. It's a sexually transmitted disease. And so you don't get it by just walking outside, by just hugging somebody, by just shaking a hand. And so the reality for our parents and guardians, and even our pupils and students and teachers, is that this thing is new to all of us. We have never experienced anything like this in our lifetime. And so I was particularly upset, Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, when I saw a viral video on social media making the wrongs of a mother who had a skirt hurriedly drawn above her chest, and people were laughing at the fact that she didn't look like she was properly attired and so on. And I would be most upset if it was a teacher that leaked that video, because certainly we must understand the pressures that parents are under. Certainly we must understand that on an average day, parents who are helping students with homework are not doing so with white robes, covering themselves and a coffee mug in their hands. That's the reality. And so we have to be patient with parents. And yes, I accept that. And I can agree with that, and I can implore teachers to be patient with parents. The motion also asks us to acknowledge the fact that the THA wanted to have a blended approach prior to the most recent lockdown that we're on. And that in itself reminds us of how powerless this Tobago House of Assembly as an institution is. And very often you will find me come here and remind this house that most of the things we wish we can do, we cannot do because we really do not have the power so to do. And if the COVID-19 response in Tobago is so good and so great and we are managing so well, then Tobago should really be empowered to step away from what is happening in Trinidad. I myself thought of a blended approach. I myself thought of what it would mean, for example, if we should allow upper school children, that's those from 4th to 6th form, alone to attend school and be spaced out all over the school while the rest of the school is taught online, and teachers come to school and teach their online sessions from at school and the in-school sessions in a very spaced out classroom. I thought about all of that too. But again, we do not have either the power or the willpower to operate laterally, to think and operate laterally, because for some reason our approach has always been, if Trinidad says do it this way, that's the way we are going to do it. Let's just follow suit. But the motion at the end of the day resolves to do two things. And all the preamble to the motion does is just that. Be a preamble to the motion, to the resolution. And the results of the motion is firstly that we support the initiatives of the Division of Education, and we support whatever initiatives that they do have. And yes, we have seen the strides that they have made. We heard previously that we will get some devices from UNICEF. Those haven't arrived as yet. Then we also saw that there's a desire to spend some additional millions to acquire some more devices. We are yet to hear what is the process. We are yet to hear how that will work, how many students or pupils that will cover. And so when the minority leader and the counselor, the minority counselor, spoke about the fact that, we're just throwing these statistics in a scattered way out there. What they are really pointing to is that at this point in the debate, we don't know precisely how many students in Tobago require a device. At least it wasn't said. Some mention was made of some schools. And yes, I must give the Secretary of Education credit for pulling out the stats for schools in my area. In fact, I had all of those stats written down and waiting. And when I heard him, I said, well, this man probably listened to me a little bit too much. So he preempted me. But the point is, across the entire island of Tobago, how many devices are needed at this time? Because if we're asking corporate citizens to assist us, if we're begging them, we should be able to say to them, we need X amount across the entire island. And we should be able to break that down further and say we need X amount for students or pupils and X amount for members of faculty, for members of staff. And so there still isn't a very clear picture of how much is needed, because we haven't quantified in the debate so far what is needed. The second part of the resolution asks that, that we seek that we call on employers and managers and supervisors, both in public and private sector, to demonstrate a sense of tolerance and understanding and so forth. And I remember coming to this house soon after it was announced by the Prime Minister that we're going to have something called pandemic leave. And I kept asking, how will that work? How will that work? Is there a legal instrument for a way to that for that to work? And again, yes, I appreciate that we need to beg corporate Tobago and Trinidad by extension, to be kind, to be aware and cognizant of the times we're living, and to give some little length of rope, allow workers to come in a little late, allow some to work online, rotate staff and so on. But the reality is, even in the public service, where we are doing some rotations now, we still have some parents who are having difficulties. We still have parents who have exhausted all their regular leave. We still have parents who are still struggling to cope. And for us, we must ask ourselves, is the state better prepared for treating with this pandemic than the private sector? Look around our divisions. Our divisions and departments, do they have facilities for holding children there? So that if workers still have to work and so on, and this goes beyond the pandemic. This hits at the heart of a society that for many, many years have refused to really progress with the times, have refused to embrace technology. And this should be seen as an opportunity for us to force the public sector, firstly, as an example, to embrace technology and to become more technologically advanced in the way it does business. We should, at this point, have had a society that could have easily moved virtually, because we would have already had a significant part of our operations online, on soft copy. And if it is, we are still at a stage where you have to pull a drawer and look for an old book somewhere about, or a tattered manila file somewhere to find documents. If we are still at that state as a society, this pandemic shows our weakness. Not just those in the private sector. It also shows our weakness as the state. And even as we are begging teachers, I know it's ironic and borderline hypocritical, we are begging teachers and guardians and parents and students and pupils, to try your best, do your best and so on. But this is the same house. At one point we said we're going to do our sitting online virtually. We all got devices, we did one test run, and then we abandoned the idea. We who abandoned the idea of doing it virtually, here today begging people to be patient and to try the best. That's quite ironic. So clearly, we who are here at this level of the state, of the public service, have not demonstrated sufficiently the same kind of latitude and lateral thinking and lateral approaches that we are trying to employ from this society, that we're trying to require this society to do. And I also want to point out that we do have a singular lawmaking legislature in this country, and that's the National Parliament. And the National Parliament can, through the use of laws and regulations, actually make it easier to treat with some of these issues that we are begging people to be tolerant about. When we talk about the use of devices and how much is unavailable, the minority leader pointed out the laptop program that started in 2010. And as a former teacher, I'll be the first to tell you that that program was flawed. I'll be the first to tell you that that program was fraught with issues. But I will also be the first to tell you that what should have happened is that we should have upgraded that program to one that was better than it was. Because that 2010 program, it wasn't sustainable as it was, and it wasn't properly thought out. The devices weren't always the best. The maintenance was problematic. But sometimes as a country, and I always say that's one of the biggest flaws in Trinidad and Tobago and governance. There is this principle that once I come into power, it does not matter how good or partially good something was that was presented by a previous regime. It is my duty to wipe the slate clean and to ignore it all. And that's what's happened. When what we should have had by this time, by 2020, Trinidad and Tobago should have been a country that had e-textbooks for all subjects. Trinidad and Tobago should have been a country where students could have gone to schools with tablets as opposed to paper books. And there's a plethora of research about the weightiness of the book bags of our children that we have been ignoring, because everybody thinks that good education means that your child's book bag must be weighing the back down to the ground, and somehow, because Dr. Williams said that, the future is in the book bag, the heavier the book bag is, the brighter the future. The world knows that that is not true. So why it is we are not yet at the place where all our textbooks are e-books and readily available via e-format? Why are we not yet at the place whereby we have a pandemic, but it is easy for us to transition into it? And yes, there are many countries in the world struggling like we are. But at which point are we going to start comparing ourselves with the best in the world and aspire to be the best in the world? At which point are we going to stop saying, well, it have these countries in the Caribbean struggling too, and them over there and doing so well, so we okay too? At what point are we going to look at the best in the world and say, that's where I need to be? And that point should not be missed on us. And while that laptop program, some claim, did not have significant impact on student performance, we see today that we ought to have a knowledge-driven society. And when they are doing their assessment for human development now, and they're looking at education as one of the factors on the HDI, they are actually looking at internet penetration as well, as one of the elements of education. Because where there is good internet penetration, you also have access to knowledge. And I'll talk about that in a short while. To the teachers in the system, yes, I too want to ask of you to be patient and to try your best. And I wish to share an anecdote with you, Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer. The Saturday evening before school reopened, a group of teachers were using my constituency office in Speyside. They were using the internet service and they were printing stuff, organizing themselves. As a team, they were there and they were organizing their schema work and so forth. And I dropped in to drop off some sweetbread for them. And one of the teachers said to me, she said, Farley, I don't know if I can make this thing, My eyes ain't so good. I was supposed to do surgery. In one eye, I have 90-something%. I can't remember the figure. And next eye, 80-something%. The surgery got put off because of COVID. And I tell my principal, but he's still pressuring me to try to get all of this done. And to be honest, Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, I left there and I said, maybe she's just making up excuses. Maybe she don't really want to do the work. Only to find out on the first Friday that same teacher ended up fainting. And when they rushed her to the hospital, she had a slight attack of stroke. And in that moment, I pinched myself and said, oh gosh, Farley, you were so insensitive in your thoughts about the teacher's complaint. Because in my mind, yeah, you could do more. Push yourself. We're complaining about. You're home whole time. You're getting paid. Do more. But yes, teachers, you have to take good care of yourself. And it's perhaps one of the only thing from the presentation prior to mine that I will agree with, that teachers need self-care. Because we don't want to lose you in the midst of this pandemic. We don't want you to fail in this pandemic because you are critical to all of us. I also saw an article run by Guardian Media where another Tobago teacher was saying, teachers, and I'm quoting Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, and this teacher is saying, teachers are being placed under immense pressure in a system designed to fail. Close quotation. Is a teacher said that? And I could tell you it's a teacher from one of our prestigious schools that said that. And it's actually one of our high-performing teachers. I mean, a teacher who gets good results every time that also said that. So it's not just a lazy teacher. It's not a teacher who just trying to not do the work that said that. It's a good teacher who said that. And so while we are begging our teachers to be patient and to do their best, we also have to remember that as a state, we have a responsibility to them. And the question is, are we meeting our responsibilities to them? Are we meeting our responsibilities to these teachers? Many of whom have been asking for the same proper internet in the schools all the time. Long before COVID, they were asking for proper internet. Long before COVID, they were asking for proper laptops and tablets that actually work and where the hinges not falling out. Long before COVID. The fact that we only now trying to scramble during COVID says that we really were not serious about integrating technology into the classroom. We were never serious about this. I heard the move of the motion speak to the issue of internet connectivity, and I want to be less kind than him to our utility companies. Because, you see, Mr. President, I represent perhaps the most rural district on the island. And perhaps more than anyone else in this room, I experience the madness that happens with our utility companies and the kind of services that they provide. We look at Digicel. Almost on a daily basis, the system going down. Almost every day.
Member, you have 10 minutes of your original speak time remaining.
Thank you. Almost every day, the internet service goes down. Almost every day. And I cannot understand how an internet service provider that charges perhaps higher rates than the others will not be efficient. And I don't think we need to be begging Digicel. I think it was the founder of your own party who at the time said that they should take Telco and throw it in the Gulf of Paria. Maybe we should take Digicel and throw it in the Bocas. Because they're not doing a good job. They're doing a horrible job. TSTT must be included. And let us be real. These internet service providers offered next to nothing during the COVID pandemic. When people were on lockdown, Digicel was still sending your text messages left, right, and center, threatening to cut off your internet if you did not come and pay. Still sending it to you and sending text messages to remind you that you could pay online even if you can't come to a physical store. And so I don't think we should be playing nice with Digicel and TSTT. What is the Telecommunications Authority doing in Trinidad and Tobago? They have a responsibility to ensure that these service providers provide quality service, and they are not. In 2020, when I got lunch, I had to cock up internet box by a window trying to pick up internet. In 2020, we're still at that point. In 2020, we still have massive black zones. Some areas that you go, your TSTT phone cannot pick up any signal. You can't make a call. There are times I'm trying to make a phone call and the call is just not connecting at all, not even ringing out. And that is unacceptable. And COVID should not have brought us to the realization that these companies have been giving us substandard services. That's a reality. And as for Tiantech, who lives up to the nursery rhyme, winky, blinky, and nod. There isn't a day that electricity doesn't cut off at some point where I live. And I don't think I live behind God, but there are places in the world way more remote than Speyside, and that has good quality internet access and electricity. This is an energy producing nation. And for an energy producing nation, we have our own electrical company, public electrical company, playing winky, blinky, and nod with our electricity. That's unfair. And think of you may not understand, but every time the internet cuts off for a teacher that lives in areas like my area, it means they have to restart their Zoom classes because the internet would have crashed. They have to restart. They have to try to get the students back on. They have to hope the students and say, well, okay, Miss or Sir gone, I gone too. And then when it cuts off for the students, the teacher doesn't know if the student was just being rude and just left the class, or if the student is having challenges. Our utility companies are failing us during this period, and they must be taken to task for failing us. And we shouldn't try to sugarcoat it and hope that they do better, and we hope that they improve internet access in certain areas. Look how long did you sell in Tobago? Look at how long TSTT has been with us on this island of Tobago, and we're still struggling for quality service. It's unacceptable to say the least. And the Minority Leader brought a perfect example from Jamaica, where educational sites are zero rated, where you don't need internet access, meaning you don't have to have paid internet access to access certain sites. So if you have data on your phone and you need to get onto the Ministry of Education website, or you need to go onto an academic journal or UA website, it doesn't take out any charge from your data. And what? We have companies here who are doing a horrible job at providing services. And I say that without any apology. The digital divide is real, therefore, Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer. And residents in rural communities are generally greater affected, more disproportionately affected than other areas. And that has to be measured. And we have to look at that closely. Tobago is a small population. And while the numbers may look small, 10 from some villages is actually a lot when you look at the larger population. As in 10 children without access is a lot when you look at the smallness or the size of some of those populations. We must do more than just ask for support. That's the point. We must do more than just come here and say to teachers and parents and corporate citizens and private people, we need your support. We need you to give some more. We must do more than that. And this pandemic highlights the fact that as a state, as a country, that is one of the wealthiest countries in the Caribbean region, as a country that has had its blessings upon blessings, so much so that its cup kept overflowing and we were drinking from the saucer, that we have not done enough. And yes, all of that blame doesn't rest with who is at the executive in Tobago now, or who is at the executive in Trinidad now. Because I can tell you, if we have that life sport money now, we could buy plenty good devices too. But the point is, there is an opportunity cost to corruption. there is an opportunity cost to mismanagement. There is an opportunity cost to time wasting. There is an opportunity cost to when we do not progress fast enough. And I want to leave this house with a simple example. I know of a school right here in Tobago who at one time purchased a large set of Amazon Kindles, beautiful white Kindles. And when those Kindles got to the school, I don't know if it is people got bazodi, but the Kindles got locked up in a room. One teacher managed the process, and that one teacher felt like those Kindles should not be used just so. The children going to mash them up. They go take them outside. They go do all kind of thing with them. The same thing, reasons, foolish reasons people give for why we shouldn't give devices to children and why students shouldn't come to school with devices, as if we're living in 1980. But the long and short of the story is, Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, that school arrived at a particular year when they remembered, wait, we had some Kindles. But when they went and checked the Kindles, and what was the funny part of it? All of those Kindles were the older Kindles with the physical buttons. And Amazon had gone light years beyond those Kindles. Those Kindles they had were all black and white. And Amazon now had colored Kindles and so on. In other words, I want the entire of Tobago to take a lesson from that story, which is, if we do not reform and follow the natural progression of the world, we will be left behind. And by the time we are ready, or by the time a crisis comes, we will be left scrambling. We cannot in 2020, after this, still be thinking that children should not come to school with their cell phones, their smartphones, or their devices, or that schools shouldn't have internet access for students because somehow if they have internet access, all they're going to do is watch porn. Foolishness. If we are to be an innovative society, we have to reinvent ourselves all the time and quickly. And 1980 rules cannot work for 1920. And so, yes, we are all in this together. Yes, we beg parents and teachers and civil society and everybody to come on board and to try their best. But I wish to say to this house and to the executive that your responsibility cannot become the responsibility of any other stakeholder in the education sector. What you are supposed to do is that you should have already been the one providing devices long ago. That we should have long ago had e-books. That we should have long ago dealt with the criminal textbook people. That textbook crew are criminals writing books, most of which have wrong information and crappy information. All of that should have been dealt with a long time ago. And those are the responsibilities of the state, not the responsibilities of those that we come here to beg today. Thank you.
Member for Blackrock Wim Spring Garden and Secretary of Education, Innovation and Energy, Assemblyman Kelvin Charles.